What if being the strong one is actually making you weaker? What if all that advice giving and crisis managing and problem solving that you do for everyone else is slowly draining the life out of you? You don't think you're codependent. You're not sitting around waiting for some addict to come home. You're not needy or clingy or desperate. Hell, you're the opposite. You're the one everyone depends on. You maybe make the money or handle the crises, give the advice, and keep everyone's world spinning. So when someone mentions codependency, you think, that's not me. Everyone's dependent on me. But here's what nobody talks about. There's a brand of codependency that hides behind competence. It looks like strength, it sounds like leadership, and feels like love. I spent years thinking that my ability to fix everyone else's problems was my greatest asset. I was the friend with all the answers, the daughter who managed family drama, the partner who handled everything so smoothly that no one even knew there were problems to handle. From the outside, my life looked like I had it all together. But on the inside, I was drowning in everyone else's emotional chaos while completely abandoning my own needs.
So my definition of codependency is when you are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the life, the relationships, the finances, the careers of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace.
There's a big difference between being genuinely helpful and being compulsively responsible for other people's outcomes. And if you're a high-achieving person who's always been told that you're so strong and so independent, you just might be suffering from something that flies completely under the radar. Because from the outside, your life looks like you've got it all figured out. Look, we've been trained since birth to be the fixers, the peacekeepers, the ones who make everything okay for everyone else. We learned that our worth comes from our usefulness, that love means sacrifice, that setting boundaries makes us selfish bitches. But what happens when those good girl patterns become the very thing slowly killing your soul? What happens when being endlessly accommodating becomes the prison that you didn't realize you built? And really, everything comes back to the stories we tell ourselves about what it means to be a good person. But if you peel it back, a lot of those things that we believe are just old programming running on outdated software. And then these patterns repeat across generations because we mistake them for love and for strength and for virtue. But consciousness is asking us to evolve beyond the martyrdom that masquerades as service. So what if the exhaustion you feel isn't because you're doing too much, but because you're doing it all wrong? What if there's a way to be caring and capable without constantly abandoning yourself in the process? Today, our guest is Terri Cole, a licensed psychotherapist and relationship expert who coined the term high-functioning codependency after seeing the same patterns showing up repeatedly in her practice with successful, accomplished women. She's also the author of Too Much, and she spent decades helping people recognize and break free from these invisible chains. Terri was on Mind Love before talking about boundaries, and people loved that episode. So if you like this one, go back to 188 as well. In this episode, you'll learn the difference between healthy helping and compulsive overfunctioning, why your advice giving might be hurting more than helping, and 2 simple questions to ask before saying yes to anything. Welcome back to the show, Terri. I'm so excited to have you here because I got so much positive feedback on the episode we did years ago on boundaries. So now you are talking about high-functioning codependency, which we will dive into, but this is a topic that's, I wouldn't say dear to my heart, I'd say quite the opposite, but something that I've had to mull through.
Right.
So what inspired this direction?
Well, thanks for having me back, Melissa. I'm excited. Well, very similar to boundaries, right? I say the same thing is that, what do they say is that you teach what you most need to learn. So for me, codependency, although I didn't know that's what it was really negatively impacting my young life for sure, my 20s. And what started happening is that as I became a psychotherapist after being a talent agent, I started seeing this over and over again. I had my demographic is maybe type A women, high functioning women, alpha women, maybe you'd call them. I just call them high functioning because they're sort of the masters of the universe, probably like you, kind of getting it all done, right? We're doing it all for all the people. And it's not just, and we also have professions, or we're building empires, or we're writing books, or whatever it is that we're doing at the same time. So I would have these women in my practice, and I would point out to them, oh, hey, what you're describing in this relationship, this is a codependent pattern. And they would immediately be like, no, absolutely not. Dependent. I'm not dependent on crap, Terri. Everyone's dependent on me. I'm making all the money. I'm making all the moves. I'm doing all the emotional labor. There's no way. I'm not involved with an addict. This is what people would say over and over again. So I realized, oh, they actually don't know what codependency is. And then I started doing research, just my own, copious notes in my practice. And I was seeing all of these similarities. So I realized that the brand of woman that was seeking my help were these masters of the universe, and yet they were still suffering. So I put high functioning in front of codependency. And now my clients were like, me, I'm the problem, it's me. They were able to raise their hand without shame. And obviously, as a clinician, you could see that it would be easier to help people if they can see themselves in the problem. So when they were saying that's not me, well, that's the end of that conversation. So how do you move past it? So my definition, let's talk a little bit about that, because what I really feel like happened is that my clients were being unduly influenced by the seminal text by Melody Beattie, Codependent No More. And that all of that came out of it really came out of 12-step work. All of the people who were the early pioneers in codependency, and they were all from like Minnesota or somewhere. It's funny, they were literally all together. But that's what that was about. And I was like, we need an updated version of codependency because we are suffering from this affliction. But because we're doing it all, it's like no one knows that we're suffering. So my definition of codependency is when you are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the life, the relationships, the finances, the careers of the people in your life to the detriment of your own internal peace.
I am so grateful for that redefinition because I read the book Codependent No More when I was in my early 20s, and I had just gotten out of a relationship with an addict. And honestly, my situation even fit pretty well in the previous definition or understanding of it. But I still had a difficult time relating to that term because I was like, what do you mean? No, he's dependent on me, like codependent. Like I have to be at fault because I'm the one that's trying to save his life here.
Right.
So
Yes.
when I would give people the book later on, because I ended up reading it and I was like, oh, this does actually really relate to me. I always had to have a disclaimer, like, I think this might help you, but you're going to have thoughts that it's something totally different than it is. It was like I had to introduce the book before the book could introduce itself.
Yes. So I think that's, Melissa, you're not the only one, right? This is a very common experience because it didn't really fit. We get to the point where we're not sitting at home waiting for someone who has an addiction issue. They're not spending the rent money on the day they get paid. Like this is, we have these old school ideas of what that is. But let's look at what are the traits of a high functioning codependent so people who are listening can identify themselves in it. First and foremost is feeling responsible for fixing other people's problems. Right? If you just cannot stop giving your grade A advice to people about what they should be doing, that is one of the massive symptoms. And it's auto advice giving, where no matter what situation you're in, you have ideas. You have a thought. I have a fix. I have a thing for that. And keep in mind, you guys, no matter how I'm talking about this, sometimes I use humor, never any shade, because this was me. And I'm in recovery, which is all we can hope for. There is literally no cure for this thing because we're a bunch of empaths and highly sensitive people. All we're doing is changing our behavior to have healthier behaviors. But if you're a big lover with a huge heart, you don't suddenly, you don't get on the other side of this affliction and you're suddenly like totally self-absorbed and it's all about me. That's not going to happen. So, all right, other traits. Always ready to jump into damage control mode. So we make amazing friends because we're the ones who run towards the problem when your friend calls. We could get frustrated and angry when people don't take our advice that we are so generously giving to them. You might feel a little bit exhausted. You might feel a little bit bitter, right? So we have auto advice giving. We have being overly self-sacrificing, where we are always, as HFCs, we're willing to take one for the team. We're like, whatever, it's not even that big of a deal. Like, just do your thing. And again, why are we doing this though? We'll get to all of the whys. But the behaviors are important to be able to look at. Auto accommodating. So this is something that I only recognized within the last decade, which is kind of interesting because I've sort of been in somewhat recovery. But I noticed, and this is something different about high functioning codependence, is that we don't just become codependently attached to the people in our lives. We become codependently attached to the situations and circumstances, it's almost like we could become codependent with the world. So I was in my hair salon in New York City, and I was, they had like a thing on my hair where I had to lay in the sink, right? So it was like like a mask. So I was going to be in the sink for 20 minutes. And now there's a line is starting to accumulate. The sink flow. There's a problem with the sink flow. And I'm like, well, I don't need to be using a sink. Like I'm going to be here for half an hour. I could be sitting anywhere, So every new person who got online, my anxiety is jacking up until I finally have to raise my hand and be like to the assistant, oh, hey, you know what, Jill, I could move. And she's like, hi, Terri, we do this every Saturday, dude. We got it covered, but thanks. And I realized in that moment that here's me all over someone else's side of the street, right? Because it's not my responsibility to figure out the sink flow. I didn't want the assistant to get in trouble. Like all of these things, what could I have been doing? Laying there. I could have been meditating. I could have been listening to a podcast. I could have called my mother. But instead, I was like circulating cortisol in my system for no good reason, for something that had fucking nothing to do with me. Again, so this is high functioning codependency, where we feel like we want to, you're on a plane and someone wants to sit together and you're like, I'll move. Or, you're on the 12 or less line and you have 10, but the person behind you has 2. And you just wave them in front of you without even thinking about it, right? Like we're so dialed into our environment. So that's what auto accommodating is. And then we have the painful anticipatory planning, where you're going to be, let's say my situation that I give in the book, and I had these 2 uncles who were both idiots. So they didn't talk to each other. I would have Christmas. They would come to my house, but I needed to manage them not getting into a fight at my house. So I would tell my one sister, you're with Uncle Bobby, you're with Uncle Jimmy, to my other sister. I would make sure I had the booze that they drank. I would keep them at opposite ends of the table, like anticipatory planning to the most ridiculous degree. How about just having a conversation with grown adults and saying, if you 2 idiots can't get along, don't come to Christmas, right? But instead, I was like the puppet master, like it'll be fine. And the last 2 things I want to say about this, and then we can unpack any or all of them, is overfunctioning. So overfunctioning just really means exactly what it sounds like. You're doing more than your share. But how this impacts our relationships is really important to point out. Because when you are an overfunctioner, if you are the I got it girl, right? I got it. It's not a big deal. I mean, I couldn't even let like the cab driver, he's trying to get out to like move my bag. I'm like, forget it. I got it. Don't worry about it. Like I'm putting the bag into the back of the trunk. You know what I mean? Even that, I couldn't let the person whose job it was to do. I have no idea. I mean, even now, I'm not exactly. There's a certain hyper independence that comes along with being an HFC, which we will also get to. But over and under functioning, I say this with a little bit of tongue in cheek, but in my 20s, I could take a perfectly capable boyfriend and turn that guy into an underfunctioner in about 2 weeks or less because of how capable I always was. And whatever he was doing, he wasn't either doing it right, he wasn't doing it fast enough, he wasn't doing it on my timeline. I was the queen of, and a lot of HFCs are, like, God, it's just so much easier if I just do it myself. But that is a short-term plan because it does not work in a long-term way. And the last thing is self-abandoning, because all of the things I'm talking about requires a hefty dose of self-abandonment.
I relate to so many of those. And it's interesting because as you speak, I am one of the lucky ones where my husband does more than any relationship I know in real life. And I think we both just kind of overcommitted this year. So we're both doing too much, but it's interesting how I am able to let go really well in our family. But I have a very difficult time letting go in a work environment. Like, I've had one assistant for a long time and I have some other people that work with me, but I need to find a new assistant right now. And like the idea of even passing things off feels so overwhelming.
Mm.
And I'm curious, how do we get this way? Why do some people have such a struggle with this?
Well, part of it is, look at how we were trained, right? Look at how we were trained in childhood, and look at if we're going to look at the patriarchy as a whole, right? There's a macro view of what it means to be a woman. So we start with the home training of be a good girl, be nice. Like, we were all, I think, indoctrinated into the cult of nice, right? It was more important in my family for other people to think I was nice, maybe than to actually even be nice. But it was very important. Where's my happy girl? Turn that frown around. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So our messages were be compliant, be pleasant, be helpful, right? So these are socially sanctioned things where there's an expectation. Nobody was telling you to set boundaries. Nobody was like, assert yourself authentically. That's really important. At least not in most families. Listen, I'm 61. I don't know how old, I mean, if you're younger than me, but it's like, were you raised to be like, assert your true feelings in all things? It was like, do well in school, be a good kid, be helpful, be kind. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there's got to be like a balance of also be yourself, also have good boundaries. I did not have those things. I also was being raised during a time when, if you think about the evolution of women and our rights, and I mean, what a nightmare it is right now and how everything has gone backwards, but okay, hopefully that's temporary, is only in early 70s, when you think about it, a woman you couldn't get a house loan. You couldn't have a credit card without a male cosigner till 1973. You couldn't get a small business loan by yourself until after 1986 as a woman. I mean, do you understand what the messages that we got? So my unofficial 2 cents on how the patriarchy and all of that influenced us is that once we were allowed to be anything other than a nurse, a secretary, or a teacher, right? Those were the 3 careers we were allowed to have, like in the late 60s going into the 70s. We were so friggin' happy that we could be like engineers and like rocket scientists, actually, that we're like, don't worry, we'll still do everything. Just please let us use our brains and make some money too. And we'll still do everything. So this whole sense of overfunctioning and feeling like you have to be the perfect mother, and you have to be the perfect daughter, and you have to be the perfect, citizen, and you have to help other people and girlfriends, and all the pressure that is put on us, it makes sense as to how we could become these overfunctioning perfectionists, basically, is what you're looking at as HFC. Also, the hyper-independence is a real thing. And it's kind of a miracle that you can give up control in your marriage. And yet I also found someone and I laugh about my husband and say, he's a bigger high-functioning codependent than I am. And he would have to be a bigger one than me for me to be able to be with him and let him do anything. So it's like I didn't get married till I was 35. I waited long enough, and got healthy enough to be able to find someone where there was the mutuality. So instead of the codependency that I had suffered with in every other relationship prior to my marriage. And listen, we're together 27 years. Obviously, is there some codependency? Of course there is. But it's basically healthy because there's mutuality. And it's possible to get there, but you have to know where you are right now. The hypervigilance that we have around independence, at least what I had, is I just didn't trust people. Like I just didn't trust that someone was either that they wanted to do it. I was so worried about being a burden. I wanted to only add value. Like I was very much like my value is my contribution. I'd never, when I was younger, thought like, well, I'm just valuable for being me. Like that really wasn't part of how even though I had good self-esteem, but in romantic relationships, I absolutely felt like I needed to be useful. I needed to be adding value. And I think that a lot of high functioning codependents feel that way, and that being vulnerable, really vulnerable, is so scary.
It's so interesting that just the flashbacks I had with some of the things you said. Growing up, I was an only child, and I remember thinking of life like a video game where you could just develop all these skills. And on one hand, that's a beautiful thing, and it really pushed me to become multifaceted and complex. But when I really look at the truth of what I was experiencing at that time, it was similar to what you said, where I had to build up my value so that I would be chosen. And I didn't ever want to be dependent on a man because, well, I think part of it was a fear of not being chosen. And so it was easier to choose that I was going to be independent.
Right. Yep.
And like thinking it was a me choice, but it was like, no, this way I just won't have my heart broken. I'm not
It was
trying
like preemptive. It was like being
Yeah.
preemptively protective of yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember even looking at friends getting into relationships or whatever. I remember specifically in like sophomore year of high school, one crush dating this girl. And I was just like, wait, I think I had the last two skills I had developed were with him in mind, like, things I thought he would like. And I was like, she doesn't have any of those things. I don't understand how this game works. And that's something that I just sort of brushed to the side. But when I think about it, that's so sad because you're right. I did not feel valuable just as me. I had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
self-esteem because I worked on myself quite a bit, but that was all surface level. As far as like general worth, I don't think that was there.
Which makes so much sense though, because the demographic that I'm talking about, a lot of high functioning codependents are very successful. So you can do it differently. You know, there's like a yogic saying, it was like, how you do anything is how you do everything. And as a psychotherapist, I never really thought that was true, because the reality is you could feel very confident in your skills. And I was always successful. I was successful young. I was a talent agent before I became a therapist. Like, you know, that like sort of leaping up that ladder with my ambition, I knew who I was at work and what I brought. And in a relationship, I didn't understand inherent value. And I thought that I had to bring, as you're saying, all of these skill sets or all of these things in order to be worthy of love, really.
When I look at my husband, who, as I said, just shows up, like I constantly find myself just this month in groups where people are talking about their relationships. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful for mine. And I was just having a conversation with somebody who said, yeah, but my partner's parents are very traditional, blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking about it, and my partner's parents, my husband's parents, his dad was 12 years older than his mom. His dad had never changed a diaper. His dad provided the money side of things, and he worked around the house quite a bit or on the land and whatnot. But
Mm-hmm.
he didn't see that, and somehow ended up being a partner who he changed all the diapers. That was actually our rule when I was breastfeeding. I was like, I got to feed and do a lot of the nights. You do all the diapers. So I'd like call him down from his office
I
just
love
for
it.
a poop. And so I know so many of these things are shaped by what we've experienced, but do you think that it's an excuse that this is just all you saw. This is all a man saw in his or while he grew up or from his parents. Why do some switch and some don't? Any theories on that?
I do. And I think that there's a combination. A lot of it has to do with your family of origin. I mean, most of it. I mean, I always say we got to go back to the scene of the crime, which is family of origin, where what you saw and who you identified with. You know, part of where I see how my husband is the way he is because he was widowed in his 20s with 3 young sons, a 5, a 3, and a 1-year-old. His 29-year-old wife died of cancer. And so he turned into, he grew these maternal traits because he had to. So he, when I met him, I was blown away. I was like, wow, this guy, he's always like, I packed you a snack. There's water in the car for you. Like he'd be like, you want me to get that stain out of your sweater? And want me to darn your socks? And I'm not kidding. He's like, there's a hole, but I fixed it. I'm like, who is this fucking guy? Like, who is this guy? Yay. But again, that's a circumstance. Would he have been exactly like that if his wife, well, I wouldn't be with him, obviously, if his wife didn't die and they stayed married. I think that it depends on the social, how socially sanctioned the behaviors are, right? And what are your agreements in the relationship? Because I see this with so many therapy clients where they get into relationships and they're not really happy with the unspoken agreements that they have. And they think the person's going to change. And I always say, if someone wants to get married, I always say, listen, good for you. And you need to be satisfied if your person never changed 1 iota for the rest of your life. Would you still marry them? Like, are you banking on them changing and you're saying yes to a future them who doesn't exist yet? If that's the case, don't do it because there's literally no guarantee that anyone's going to change. Listen, hopefully we all evolve, and you evolve more when you do it on purpose. But I think that we collude. A lot of times you will have people in that union colluding with the limitations of both. But you don't realize how it's really going to be once you start having kids or once right? You don't know. You think it's going to be great. You always see these young moms who are like, I'm only going to do this. I'm only going to do that. And and then it very idealized and good for them. But the reality is it's messy, and raising children is messy, and being in love is messy, and having a family is messy. And we have to deal with that. So I think that people can change, though. For me, one of the most important things in a relationship, and I had a stipulation before I got to a point in my life. I was, I had a massive career. I was living in New York City, and I really got done with unexamined minds. I was like, I'm never dating another guy who hasn't had 20 years of therapy. I don't give a shit. I'm so done. I'm barely figuring out my own crap. I cannot figure it out for 2 people. And I want someone who feels responsible for their own mental health. Like, it can't be my burden. And my friends were all like, yeah, good luck. That's never happening with a straight guy. I was like, whatever. Then I also decided at that point, I built this amazing life for myself. I'm not unhappy. Like, I was dating people kind of casually. Like, I really just got to it. And I didn't have a lot of pressure from my family of origin to get married. There wasn't this you're less than because you're not thing. So the moment that I sort of accepted that, and I'd been doing a bunch of work on my father wound as well during this time, there was something about being able to just say what I wanted. And I remember the first real date with my husband, I just was like, and I said to my friends, 20 years of therapy. And I said to him, how do you feel about therapy? And he said, oh, I'm a big fan. And I was like, how big? He was like, oh no, I've had a lot of therapy. I was like, but if you had to like ballpark, how much? He was like, oh, at least 2 decades. I was like, amazing. Date 2 can happen.
That's so funny because that's actually one of my agreements when you were saying how you got to expect them not to change. I was like, well, our agreement was the reason that we got along so well is we were both constantly improving. And so part of my stipulation is you kind of have to be agreeing to, beyond, not necessarily change who you are, but like have awareness, looking for things that can get better our whole life. Like that's what I think life is
Yeah.
about. And it's why we bonded. And I also think that awareness is so key, because when I think about perhaps why my husband has turned out so well, I'll call it, has shown up for me in a way that maybe his dad didn't, is his dad was so much older than him that he was great. Like he gave a lot of little like tidbits of life advice and taught him how to build and things like that. But he never felt really close to his dad because his dad was so much older. And so when
Yeah.
he wanted children, he said that he wanted to be involved in their lives and be friends. And so he was still seeing what he grew up into and making the conscious points of like, this is what I want to take from my dad and this is how I want to be different. And even that can kind of set you on another path. But for a lot of people, I find that they don't make those, they don't bring light to their unconscious agreements. And so
Right.
they end up in a pattern, and then it's years in, and now they're in a spot where they say, well, now I've set the precedents. How do I then go back
Mhm.
and now enforce boundaries, now ask for what I want?
Here's the thing. It's never too late to change your agreements. Is it a little harder? Yeah, it is going to be. Will there be more resistance? Of course. But the bottom line is, if you love someone, by telling the truth about how you feel, about what you want, about what's not working for you, that's actual love, right? Going with the status quo, saying yes when you want to say no, you're really giving corrupted data to your person about who you are, about what you want. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to grow. And so I think we have to take responsibility for that. And a lot of high functioning codependents and a lot of women in general are very conflict avoidant. We just don't want there to be any problems. If I were to say the overall desire for a high functioning codependent, we just want peace. We want everyone to be happy. We work hard. We want everyone to get what they want. We want everyone to be happy. We want to be happy. And so sometimes that means we don't know how to approach these more difficult conversations. And of course, in the book, I walk you through and I give you scripts. But as in all the work that I teach, we got to go in before we go out, right? You have to, and the first half of the book is basically walking you through understanding why you are the way you are. How does these behaviors express themselves in your life and in your relationships? Because really everything that I teach is about the reader, right? It's not about me. It's about you. So I have all these things in the book called Back to You. So I teach a concept, and then I'm like, okay, now let's apply this to your life, Melissa, because that's why you're here, is trying to figure out your life, right? It's not you necessarily wanting to hear about my life. Looking at the costs, right, to you to continue to live this way. So I can say that the women who would come into my office in their fifth, sixth, seventh, right, decade of life, let's say, there's a lot of burnout, right? Sort of living life light, where you're so preoccupied with all the other people, so preoccupied with getting it all done, that you're not fully present in the here and now when you're experiencing things. I've seen all of the health challenges that come along, how bad it is for your nervous system to be trying to control so much. Because listen, any kind of codependency, I don't care whether we talk in garden variety, whether you're involved with an addict or whether you're a high functioning codependent, the foundation of that behavior is an overt or covert desire to control other people's outcomes, right? We don't want the person to be sad. We don't want the person to lose their job. We don't want our kid to pick the wrong college. We don't, right? And this is not to say, listen, we're all empaths and we're lovers. Obviously, we love our people. Obviously, we want our people to be happy and get what they want, of course. But when you're a high functioning codependent, you don't just want them. You feel responsible for making it happen. And this is where we're stepping over the line, where it's being very unclear about what is my side of the street, my responsibility, what is your side of the street, your responsibility. And I think one of the biggest changes, anybody listening who's like, oh my God, this is so many things, and I feel like I'm all of these things. One of the quickest, I'll give you a couple of things that you can do like right now that you could change this moment. And I promise you it would change your relationships. If you identify as an auto advice giver, let's just say, instead of, you're just going to commit to no more, just no more. Anybody, even when someone's asking you, even if someone says, Melissa, I'm in this situation, what do you think I should do? You say, hey, I'll give you my 2 cents later, but for right now, a more important question is, what does your gut instinct say? What do you think you should do? And this is whether you're talking to a 6-year-old, 16, or 60. It doesn't matter. Because the truth is, what the person with the problem thinks is infinitely more important than what you think, because the goal shouldn't be fixing, quote unquote, the problem. The goal is supporting that person you love coming to their own conclusion. And of course, listen, we're mothers, we're aunties. Obviously, we're not going to never give someone our opinion again, but it can't be the first stop on the bus. The first stop on the bus must always be, okay, so let's start with, what do you think you should do? And if they go, I don't know, you go, okay, but if you did know, what would it be? Just take a stab. Like what first comes to mind when you first thought it? Let's help people get to their own answers. So if that would be the one thing you took away from here, I promise you it would change your life, because what happens is we are, first of all, you don't know what other people should do. So let's just start with a basic truth that as high functioning codependents, I walked around life literally and for real thinking I did know what everyone else should be doing. Part of this whole thing of high functioning codependency, for me, the whole concept, it was brewing, but what really brought it to the fore for me was a situation. I think we talked about this last time, that one of my sisters was in. She was in an abusive relationship. So she was in a bad relationship. She kind of always was in not good relationships. I was the youngest, but I was the designated oldest, right? Sometimes that happens in family systems where even though I was the youngest, but I was the designated oldest. So I was the fixer and I was the hero child and whatever. So she's living with this guy who's, abusive. She's an alcoholic. He's like doing crack. She has no running water. It's upstate New York, no electricity. It's fucking winter. Like, it's just a complete nightmare, especially for an HFC where you're like, I have to fix this situation. This is horrible. So, she would call me and tell me about it. And I would, get off the phone and bawl my eyes out. And I remember talking to my therapist and I was crying hysterically. And I was like, Bev, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I've done everything. I've sent money. I've sent books. I offered to, I was going to call the police. I was going to hire my cousin to beat him up. Like, all these things that I was going to do. And she said, Terri, let me ask you something. What makes you think you know what your sister needs to learn in this lifetime? And I was like, well, I think we can both agree that it doesn't have to be with this abusive piece of shit living in the woods with no running water. I mean, can we agree on that? And she's like, no, I can't agree. Because here's the thing. I don't know what your sister needs to learn or how she needs to learn it, because I'm not God and neither are you. So do you understand what's happening for you? And I was like, obviously not. So tell me, what is happening for me? And she said, this, you just want to fix it. You have worked super hard to create this pretty harmonious life. And your sister's dumpster fire is really messing with your peace. And you really want your peace back. And I was like, dude, you are not lying. I wanted to fix it because it was so painful to have to be in this foxhole with her. Nothing was changing. And I was like, but what can I do? She's my sister. Am I going to abandon her? I mean, what? And she said, Terri, you need boundaries. And this was in my 20s. And this was the beginning of me being like, what? What are boundaries, lady? Tell me all about it. And I was able to set a boundary with my sister saying, I love you and I cannot have you talking to me about this guy. And when and if You are ready to get out of this hellscape. I will always be your person. I will always help you. And probably we spoke only like probably 2 times in like 9 months, which was so painful. I felt very guilty, of course. And she called me and she was like, are you still my person? I was like, getting in my car right now.
That is my number one lesson from dealing with addicts. And it's so interesting because my downward spiral that happened in my early 20s, when I look back, I am so proud of my mom, which is just
Mm-hmm.
interesting because in many areas, my mom can be very controlling. And
Mm-hmm.
somehow she watched this. And mind you, I don't know what she would have done, like besides like lock me in my bedroom. But with all of the stuff that I put her through that was so terrifying, looking back now, I needed
Mm-hmm.
it to get that far. And I learned that for my own path and my own rock bottom, but I also learned it about trying to, as I call it, you can't you can't cushion someone's rock bottom without going down with them. And then you're the one with all the bruises. Like you just cushioned the fall. And then they fell and it doesn't really hurt. And so they'll keep falling and you'll keep going lower and lower and lower
Yep.
with them, trying to be that cushion, and they're just not feeling it. Versus if you would have on phase one just been like, yeah, this sucks that you don't have anywhere to sleep tonight, but maybe you'll feel terrified enough to make a change.
Yep.
And I know that's so much easier said than done, especially when you're really worried about your own child or somebody's life. But I don't think I've seen it play out where you can go in and be the savior and either of the people end up doing well afterward.
No, because the thing is, it has to come from you. And I think that my therapist was clear about that too. She's like, and all these efforts that you put in are prolonging her reaching her bottom. Exactly like you just said, Melissa, right? Like, so you're doing it. I think the most painful or ego painful part of the whole realization was that I really thought I was pure love. I thought this is just me being Mother Teresa, like trying to save her, you know? And what I realized with what my therapist helped me see was that it was more about me than I would have liked to have admitted. But it's okay. And that there was a healthy thing I could do, which was to create a boundary. And luckily for me, the story ended up great. So I helped her, my husband and I helped her appropriately, right? Where she was still in control. Her baby sister wasn't saving her, right? Because she didn't need that. But she went back to school. She got a degree. She, started a different career. She stopped drinking. She never was in another abusive relationship since then. And that was decades ago. But that was all on her terms. So now she gets the self-esteem that comes from making that hard choice, the self-worth that comes from achieving something, not someone handing it to you, right? And it's hard. But that was the thing that made me realize that all the overfunctioning and the overgiving and the overdoing was more about me than the other people. And what love would do, right? What is love? Love is being willing to be in the foxhole with someone during a dark night of the soul and not fixing them, right? The real flex in love is to be like, I am compassionately witnessing you. This blows. How can I best support you, right? Is there anything that I can do besides be here? Or I'm just here if you want to talk about it, or I love you, or that sounds awful. And just letting it be what it is, because we've all been on the receiving end of someone being like, it's not that bad. Takes two to tango. God never gives you more than you can handle. Like, please stop with these platitudes. I want to like strangle somebody, because it's not helpful. That's to make the person saying that feel better. Someone dies and they're like, but she lived a nice long life. Maybe I didn't want my grandmother to die ever. Maybe you saying that doesn't help me. It helps you feel better. Please stop saying that.
Yeah, I realized that when I began to understand what it means to be an empath. And I'm the
Mm.
kind that I don't like to stick with labels. Labels are very helpful and it usually helps me see patterns that I couldn't before.
Mm-hmm.
But then I like to move through them and then kind of like leave them where they were. Like, okay, now I know. But yeah, same thing where I always wanted to fix people's problems because their problems made me uncomfortable, and it would I wouldn't have to feel the dis-ease in the room. I am definitely an auto advice giver. I was just listening to something the other day. I really like streaming the Global Center of Christ Consciousness in Sedona. And he just said the other day, and you want your kids to go down a certain path. Like, you don't want them to choose the wrong religion or spiritual path, but that is just another way to control. It is inappropriate for you to tell them what they need to go through in this life. And I find that in many areas, we're so much better with parts of this with our kids. Maybe not the religious paths, but the part where, if my child asks me for help, I am good at saying, I'd like to know what you think, or how would you do that? Let's problem solve together, something like that. But I was just thinking, my cousin just asked me, she's like, you have the healthiest, longest hair I've ever seen. What is your trick? And all of a sudden I'm texting her like 19 different products, my whole routine, a silk pillowcase, the sleepy tie, all of this stuff. And I was like,
that's different though.
Sort of,
That's
but
different.
She was overwhelmed, so I don't think it was different. She didn't respond for like 3 days, and she's like, sorry, that was a lot. And then it was like 3 words, and I was like, yep, too much. Yes, exactly.
That's so funny. So let's give listeners, you guys, if you're listening and you're like, okay, so yes, me, checking boxes, feeling this. I think that people always ask me, what's a good place to start? Because it can feel overwhelming. I mean, I have a gift for your audience that's going to help them start somewhere. It's like it's an HFC toolkit. So they can get that at terricole.com/HFC. So that's like a video for you, simplify and do less. I've got some guided meditations. It's just a little toolkit for anyone who's identifying as an HFC and sort of like, now what? But another thing that you can do that I think would be really helpful is do a resentment inventory. Because this will show you where you're probably doing more than your share or where a boundary needs to be drawn. So how do we do it? We all know. It's exactly what it sounds like. Think about your relationships. We know where we're copying resentment or holding resentment. Write down who the person is, what the situation is, and basically what is your 50% of it, right? How did it get here? Do you need to have a conversation that you haven't had with that person? In the book, I tell a story of my sister using her key to go into my apartment and take my clothes without telling me. Like, I had a key to her place too. We shared closets basically, but I always told her and make sure that it wasn't something she needed. And she would always just go in and like take, and then I'd be like looking for something for like 3 weeks and be like, I can't believe I lost that thing or whatever. So that was me basically, the resentment inventory. I would put that down. But then my 50% before I said anything to her was that I was thinking it, but I wasn't saying it, because you don't even know how somebody is going to respond until you say something. So part of the resentment inventory is for us to understand, how am I colluding with this behavior that I don't like in my life? And what is the next right action that I can take that might remedy what is going on? So that's one thing that people can do.
You also have a rule that I really loved, because I think this helps me in like 19 areas of my life, but you call it the 24-hour rule. Tell us about just kind of taking that space and when we should use it.
About not taking back a boundary, that one?
Yeah, it's the 24-hour rule gives you space to cool down before you second guess yourself and cave. Yep. And I'm the kind who's like, if I get a message, I'm either ignoring it indefinitely or I'm responding right away. There's rarely in between.
I don't know why ignoring indefinitely is really funny. Definitely. I'll be getting back to this never. Okay.
Somebody just asked me like, hey, I'm actually in that phase of just being overcommitted. And I probably could have used this rule the other day, but somebody was like, I don't know, like connecting me with somebody, you guys should talk and interview each other, which I already find interesting. but then they text me and I don't even see this until it's all going on. Hey, do you have time to chat this week? And I was like, I don't even have time to chat with my mom this week. No. And so I just wrote back, I'm at max capacity. Send me an email. And then I was like, that was probably a little too short.
Yeah, but fuck it. Sometimes you just got to handle it. Yeah. So the 24-hour rule, and you guys can use this, is basically giving yourself the space when you feel pressured to give an answer, right? If you're an auto yeser, right? If you're kind of a people pleaser, if you're an appeaser, I want you to take the next 7 days and know, same way that we're not giving auto advice, we're now not giving an auto yes. There is no insta yesing anything, no matter what it is. And you're going to give yourself, and what you can say instead is, I need to check with my partner. I'll get back to you. Or you can say, I have a 24-hour decision-making policy, so I'll let you know tomorrow. What happens is when we give ourselves the time and space to really think about it, we will make decisions that are actually aligned with how we really feel, not with the people pleaser in us. Because what happens when we let the people pleaser drive is that we're pissed off all the time. We're resentful. There needs to be rules. So what you're saying, Melissa, someone says, really want to set you with my friend. You're like, no, because so much of the time when people do that, it's for the other person's benefit, not yours.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they're like, I think you'd love each other. You're like, I love a lot of people and I already have a lot of people in my life. So no. And be super clear. I had a friend of mine years ago when I was in my 20s. I didn't know. She was fancy and more well-known than I was. And I had a friend who was like, oh, can you connect me with so-and-so? And I was like, yeah. So I did it without asking her. I did a connection email. And she immediately texted me and she was like, Terri, do not ever connect me with someone without my permission. I don't want to partner with this person. I don't know them. I know your heart's in the right place. I'm just telling you right now. No. I was like, wow. And of course, now, obviously, I live by that rule. And I always will tell people, do not spontaneously put me on an email with someone, please. Writing a book. I'm super busy. It makes me feel rude that I either don't follow up. I'm not going to follow up with them. Or like you're saying, you just feel like you're like, hi, send an email. I'm not instantly jumping on a call with you. And again, we know. And this is just the truth about like power and accessibility and different things. If it is truly a win-win, right? If a friend of mine has another friend who, let's say that person was at a similar level or had something, it really was win-win. It's different. But so much of the time it's not. So much of the time it is the other person. I'm giving free advice or free therapy for years. I did this before I had better boundaries, right? When I was younger, I would just feel obligated to say yes. But what happens is you end up being angry. And then I'm pissed off at that person and I'm pissed off at life and I'm over scheduled. So part of it is backing it all up and getting clear. And I love to say this. I say, hey, listen, this is just a policy. It's not personal, right? So anything that is a little bit hard to deliver, even with like people wanting to borrow money, I always say, hey, I got a no lending policy. This is how I protect my relationships. It's not personal to you guys. I just cannot. If I can afford to give it to you, I will, but no lending. Which is true. I never lend. And I do give. But lending is just a shit show of dysfunction. It's never coming back, or the way it comes back. Every move they make that is them not paying you back, you're like, oh, but you could go down the shore. Like, no, thank you. I do not want to feel that way about people I love.
I love that. And that is life-changing. And when I was dealing with this, and it's just such a little thing, but it's funny because I flashed back to one of my good friends. Shout out to Ashley Stahl. I remember when she was writing her book.
I love Ash.
I had asked her when we do Zoom calls sometimes to catch up. But I was like, hey, we haven't had a Zoom call in a while. Let's catch up. And she was just like, I don't have any time for calls for like the next 4 months, but reach out to me in November. And I loved that. I had no hurt feelings about it or anything like that. But I remember it sticking out in my mind. And it was like one of those things that I'll carry with me forever, because so often we think that by enforcing our boundaries, we're going to offend the other person. And that might even be the case sometimes, but it also gives people permission to reinforce their own boundaries. If they're not seeing any, especially women, doing it. I'm also reminded of another friend. This was during a time that I was kind of emotionally volatile, early 20s, going through a lot of trauma. But I remember I felt left out and I was like kind of whining to her about it. And she just said, I can't take responsibility for your emotions. And I told her about this years later and she was mortified. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that when you were going through all this. And I was like, no, I actually thought you were a huge bitch in that moment. And I cried really hard for like 24 hours, but it has sat with me for years. And it's given me something that I actually just still carry with me today. And so our boundaries can be gifts to more than just ourselves.
Let's break down why, because it's what you just said, Melissa, is so important. It's like what happens is Ashley Stahl is an emotionally trustworthy friend. So that's what it means. I wrote about one of my friends, Elizabeth D'Alto, in one of my books, I don't know, where I was like, hey, I'm going to, I don't know, fucking Guatemala somewhere. I was like going to do some yoga retreat. I was like, you want to come to Guatemala to do this yoga retreat? And she was like, no, man, I hate hot weather and hate Guatemala, but go have fun. Whatever. It was a straightforward. Of course she knows I'm not going to take it personally. And she didn't hate Guatemalan people. She just didn't like hot weather. She's like, I don't want to go somewhere where it's hot, but thanks. She's emotionally trustworthy. She's not wasting my time. She's not stroking my ego. She's not like, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, because of course that makes me want to take it the wrong way immediately. But someone just saying, I'm not taking your friend who years ago said to you, I'm not responsible. She was basically saying, I can't take on your emotions. They are not mine, right? You feel how you feel. Part of our healing comes from asserting our truth. So it isn't always about, and this is the same thing with boundaries, you guys. It's not about, boundaries are not a lever of control to manipulate someone else, right? Your healing comes from your asking and from your asserting, even if the other person says no to what it is. But you still did right by you. You become someone who can count on yourself to assert the truth about how you feel and what you want. This is where compromise comes in. This is where we figure out maybe we meet in the middle on something. But we can never meet in the middle if you're never telling someone what your actual, right? The way that I look at boundaries is they're your preferences, your limits, and your deal breakers. Right? What are the things that you're like, no, this is like a no-go for me? And those things don't just make up your boundaries. Your preferences, your limits, and your deal breakers also make up who you are as a human being. So they're super important. And I think a lot of us have been conditioned out of our preferences. We feel like, be the easy chick. That's the way to go. You know me, no muss, no fuss, whatever you guys want. I don't want that. I want friends who tell me, I really feel like having ice cream. Can we eat it before dinner? Yes, we can. Let's go. Like, this is you sharing who you really are with me. And again, we can't be so afraid to have a hard conversation, you know?
Yeah. That textbook me in my 20s, go with the flow. You guys decide, which is really funny when I started to develop boundaries. Friction in all of those relationships who wanted me to do whatever they wanted to do. But if you think about it, even in the example you just gave, it's helpful to have preferences. Otherwise, you leave all of the decision making to the other person, and that's exhausting. And they don't feel like they're with a real person. They're just like dragging along some blank slate. Yeah. Right. And so I love to leave listeners. We already gave them so many awesome action items and specifics to focus on. But if you were going to drill it down to one thing for this week, just so we don't overwhelm them and they can kind of get this in their real life, what would you leave them with?
Before you agree to do another thing in your life for other people, you're going to run the request through these two questions. Do I have the bandwidth to do this without becoming resentful? Do I even friggin' want to do it? Because we don't ask that second question often. If other people want us to do it, we feel like to be a good girl, we should. We feel like to be a nice person, we should. I really want you to start getting honest with yourself. If you ask those two questions, can I do this thing without becoming resentful? If the answer is no, then you must decline. If you cannot do the thing without becoming resentful, because this is where stopping the self-abandonment train comes in, where we just say, I'm exactly what you said, I'm maxed, so I must decline. And thank you so much for thinking of me. You guys are so great. Hope you have a great time. I just don't have the bandwidth. We leave it there. We don't have to write a dissertation on the no, but you are responsible for putting that boundary in place. And it's a perfectly legitimate reason to not do something because you don't friggin' want to, because you don't friggin' feel like it, because it's not your thing. Other people, I always say this, but people always invite me to like back in the day, not anymore. Back in the day, they'd be like, oh, we're going to go to this outside concert. It's going to be amazing. We're going to listen to the Boston Pops and eat in the sun. I'm like, nothing sounds worse. I don't want to go to an outside concert. I don't like to be around bugs. I hate the sun. I don't want to do that ever. And so my friends, of course, don't ask anymore. But back in the day, I would do it, but then hate it and be like, why was I afraid to tell this person I don't love outside concerts? It's not my thing. What, do they invent them? They didn't. And again, letting people know who you are. When we share our preferences, even what we don't like, we're deepening the intimacy in our relationships. So that's what I'll leave you with. That is something that you can really think about before you commit to anything else.
It took me 7 years to finally just tell all my friends, I hate sports bars. I don't like the wet floors. I don't like sports games. I'm so overstimulated. All the sounds, all the smelly people, the beer, no. And so that's a little bit about me, you guys. For all the people that are really resonating and they want to know more about how to work with you and your book, Too Much, where's the best place for them to connect?
Well, definitely go get the free gift, terricole.com/HFC for high functioning codependent. I have a podcast I've had for 10 years, the Terri Cole Show. You can check it out there. Go to terricole.com. I also hang out most of the time on Instagram, so you can see me over there. But on YouTube, I have probably 700 free videos. So if you're looking to make any kind of changes in your life. And I also have a community that people can join, a pay community, but I purposefully put out a crap ton of free content because I really just feel like we all should have the tools we need to evolve. If you're motivated to evolve, I have enough free tools for you to do it. That's it. And if you can spend whatever my monthly thing is, that would be great too.
Your challenge for this week is to run every single request through Terri's 2 questions. Do I have the bandwidth to do this without becoming resentful? And do I even want to do it? If the answer to either question is no, you decline. No long explanations, no guilt, just a simple, I don't have the bandwidth right now, but thank you for thinking of me. This might feel uncomfortable at first, but remember that resentment is just anger that's been stuffed down and ignored. And here's what's really happening energetically when you break these patterns. The universe operates on the law of reciprocity. So what you give comes back to you. But here's the twist that most people miss. When you are constantly over-giving from an empty cup, you're actually creating an energetic imbalance that blocks abundance from flowing back to you. So you're teaching the universe that you don't value your own energy. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you are lying to the universe about who you are. You're sending mixed signals that confuse your own manifestation process. But when you start honoring your truth, when you start saying no to what drains you and yes to what fills you up, you align with the law of authenticity. And this is when life starts working with you instead of against you. Your energy becomes magnetic because it's real. People can feel the difference between someone who's performing goodness and someone who's actually living from their authentic core. So give it a try and let me know how it goes. You can reach out to me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. The show notes for this episode is at mindlove.com/417. You can find all of my incredible sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And don't forget to sign up for the Morning Mind Love at mindlove.com. It's just a really beautiful way to get a little hit of inspiration right when you start your day, instead of letting those thoughts spiral. So again, mindlove.com. Sign up for the Morning Mind Love right on the homepage. Thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.